Yeah. So you have a 12,000 year descending cycle and a 12,000 year ascending cycle. This is what Yukteswar had also suggested, and I adopted that principle. But the difference in Yukteswar's formulation and one that I have here is that every yuga, from Treta Yuga, Dwapara, the descending Kali and the ascending Kali, all of them are of 2,700 years duration. And that 2,700 years is based on a particular calendar that we have in India, which has been used for thousands of years. And that was the primary means of reckoning large cycles of time in India. And that cycle is called the cycle of the seven sages, or the Saptarshi calendar. This 2,700 year duration is called a Saptarshi Yuga. I believe that this is the duration, actual duration of a Yuga. And then you have a 300-year period of transition after a Yuga. This adds up to a total of 3,000 years. So every yuga is of 3,000 years duration, and out of which 2,700 years is the actual duration of the yuga, and you have a 300-year period of transition afterwards. And it's also preceded by a 300-year period of transition, because they're all in a sequence. So you have 300 years before the yuga, you have 300 years after the yuga. And so this cycle, now you need to have a starting point. I mean, how do you fix a starting point for the cycle? Now, one of the starting points of the Saptarshi calendar is this particular date, 6,676 BC. We know this date. Saptarshi calendar starts every 2,700 years. So one of the starting points is this particular date, 6,676 BC. And when Alexander came to India, he was accompanied by some of his historians. And when they went back, they wrote about the Indian beliefs and traditions of that time. And one of the points that they made was that Indians were counting their kings from a person called Dionysus or Bacchus, who ruled 100 years prior to 6,676 BC. That is, he was ruling in this particular period of transition between the Treta and the Dwapara Yuga, this particular period. So my question was, who was this person called Dionysus or Bacchus that the Indians were counting their kings from? He must have been a particular king on the Indians' kings list. The Greeks called him Dionysus and the Romans called him Bacchus. What was the name by which Indians knew him? And then I came across a beautiful piece of article written by Sir William Jones. He was one of the scholars of the 18th century, and Sir William Jones had come to India during the time of the British, and he wrote an article. And in that article, he said that the person that the Greeks called Dionysus is the same person that the Indians call Rama. So Rama was Dionysus, and Rama, after he had ascended the throne, he went westwards with his army of Vanaras. We call them Vanaras, and in Greek paintings, they are depicted as satyrs. So you see these people who are who look like humans, but they have the tail of a horse, and they have some kind of a bestial feature. They have the ears of a horse and the tail of a horse. They're the satyrs who followed Dionysus when he went westwards. And he was also accompanied by some Maenads. Maenads were the female companions of the satyrs. And I figured that they are the Vanaras who followed Rama on his war campaign. So the Rama and the Vanaras are Dionysus and the satyrs. And Dionysus's wife was Arian, and Arian was Sita, because Arian had a pair of twins, and Sita also had a pair of twins. So there were a lot of things which were adding up between Dionysus and Rama, and I realized that that makes perfect sense to me. And I followed up with a lot more detail on that particular association, which is not so important right now, except all we need to know that Dionysus is Rama, and in the Indian chronological system, Rama lived in the period of transition between the Treta and the Dwapara Yugas. So I knew that the calendar which starts in 6,676 BC must denote beginning of the Dwapara Yuga, because Rama lived in the period of transition between the Treta and Dwapara Yugas, and he was dated to 6,776 BC. So 100 years prior to that date, that was the time that Rama lived. That means 6,676 BC must be the beginning of the Dwapara Yuga in the descending cycle. And so this was the anchor point that I needed to fix the Saptarshi calendar to the Yuga cycle. Okay, yeah, so it's 2025. That's the end of the Kali Yuga.
So there are just so many convergences, I think, whether you're looking at huge cycles of time, the end of the precessional cycle, 24,000 years, the fact that we're at the end of the descending Yuga cycle, which is also 12,000 years, the fact that Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, is going to end, according to Bibhu Dev Misra, who's a great scholar with this, in March, in 2 months' time. Whether you're looking at solar cycles, which are smaller, 11 to 12 year cycles, we're at the peak of solar cycle 25, whether you're looking at the fact that in the next 15 months, all of the outer planets are going to be changing sign. That hasn't happened for 300 years, but if you add in the dwarf planets that are changing sign, the deep space planets, I can't find a time in history when that's happened. We also have a conjunction between Saturn and Neptune at 0 of Aries, the most important degree in the zodiac, the creator degree, the very first beginning. That hasn't happened for over 12,000 years at 0 degrees of Aries. So you start to put all of these layers together, these convergences, and it just becomes quite mind-blowing. And then you've also got the game changers. Like I think we're going to have a lot more galactic connection. That's indicated in the astrology. We also are going through, I think, a huge biological shift to become what's called the new human or the future human. That's another huge game changer, which again is unique in our history as humanity. So, you put together all of these things and they're all converging principally in 2025. It will be turbulent, it will be fast, it will be dynamic, it will be at times chaotic, it's whitewater rafting through all of these changes. But it's very exciting because we really are shifting to a very different state of being, but it's us that makes it happen. It's us that makes it happen. And we have more of a blank slate, I think, than we have ever had before, because in our lives, there was a very, predictable, you'd go to school, you'd go to college, you'd meet someone, you'd get married, you'd get a good job, you'd have kids, you'd have a house. It was a pretty predictable kind of life map. That's up for grabs now. It's not going to be that way in future. It's going to be very different. And so all of these things, almost every aspect of our life is changing all at once, both individually and collectively. And so you can look at that as kind of, that's a really, really big, scary thing. Or you can say, we're on the ride of our lives. This is so exciting. We came for this.
Because we're still in the Kali Yuga, and because our cranial volume, this, I don't know if people know this, our cranial volume has been decreasing ever since the whole beginning of the Holocene period, ever since the end of the last ice age. Our cranial volume has decreased by 10%. Wow! And a lot of people don't know this. This is a very carefully guarded secret, but the scientific data is out there. You can find it if you look for it, and it's never discussed on any mainstream media or any outlet. You don't read it in any textbook. But we lost the same amount of brain volume in the last 10,000 years that we had supposedly acquired the last 2 million years. From Homo erectus to the beginning of the Holocene period, we had supposedly gained 10% of our brain volume from 1350 cc to around 1500 cc. And we lost the same amount in the last 12,000 years. So that, and brain volume is the main indicator of intelligence. It's an indicator of emotional intelligence. It's an indicator of memories. Our memories have declined substantially, which is why we can't remember anything right now. And the people of the ancient times, like you mentioned earlier, used to memorize gargantuan volumes of text pretty effortlessly. And we have also lost all these subtle qualities of the mind, like our intuition, our clairvoyance, foresight. All of those subtle qualities we have lost, which is why our telepathy, because the Hopis say that people used to communicate with the animals in the higher ages.
Yes.
And, and probably the animals still try to communicate with us, but we don't have that ability anymore. So our cranial volumes have declined, and it seems that it's flattening out right now. So the decline is more or less over. Yeah. Which is why I think that in the Kali Yuga, you can enhance your consciousness only if you are actively trying to do so, because your brain volume is decreasing. You're not getting any smarter. But if you use the technologies or the means that are being developed by the purely materialistic culture, then you have the opportunity to elevate yourself spiritually and purify your consciousness. But that entirely depends on your willpower. The willpower is not there, it's not going to happen.
So it's interesting because, I talked about the Malachian versus Luciferian versus Most High. And down here, there's this material stagnation, there's dead materialism. And then as you move upwards in consciousness, there's the spiritualization of humanity, which comes from the Luciferian impulse and also that crossover in the Venn diagram with the Most High. And you'll see up here, individuated telepathy. Right, so there's this hive mind of groupthink, which is very negative. Right, it's top down. One ruler tells everyone what to think, and then they feel forced to think that way. Versus individuated telepathy, where we are able to immediately communicate with one another, and we have harmonious, all is one, all is God. But within that, we have the individual, which is very important because the individual is how we evolve spiritually. See these cycles as a circle. I actually see them as, it appears as a circle because when you look downward at a spiral, it looks like a circle. But I see that actually there's an ongoing evolution upwards. And for example, the most recent golden age, we talk about Atlantis in the West. You solved a mystery I've had for a while of, was the empire of Rama the same as Atlantis? But you solved it for me. No, it was not. That was a Treta age shifting to Dwarpa age civilization. But prior to Atlantis, there is a discussion of, and I just use it, people don't like the term for various reasons, but the term Lemuria is used for a prior civilization before that. And then there's discussion of Mu, which might be Lemuria, or Hyperborea before that. But there's been a number of different golden age civilizations, just as there's been a number of different Kail Yuga and so forth. And so it was interesting to me that you said this thing about that we've lost these higher abilities, such as telepathy. Well, I believe we're moving towards that as we move towards the golden age. So it's just remarkable because we're going to see this increase in spiritualization. And there has been a burst. Yeah, we're still in the Kail Yuga, but there has been a real burst in esoteric knowledge, especially in the past century or
Indigenous people, I mean, we had, unfortunately, we lost who we were.
Right, a lot of it was lost.
But I think everybody's lost who we are. There's big stuff coming for humanity. They were terrified of us because of what we can do, because now what we could do can affect them where they live. That when we do step out into this next realm in the next 7 generations, because I'm telling you, in the next 7 generations, we will be there. We will be going to other worlds.
When you look at space and you look at the Earth, there are no lines.
No.
There are no lines of nation. They are imaginary lines that man has put together to separate ourselves.
If you're not sure if psychic ability is real, learn to become more psychic. Everybody, it's in us. It's innate within us. It's a natural part of progression and human evolution. Not even human evolution. It's within all of the animal nation and plant nation within the world.
Because you are an indigenous psychic medium.
Yeah.
Which I've never met an indigenous psychic medium. Maybe in my Latino roots, maybe I've met, but never in the North American
North American sense of indigenous.
North American.
Because I think, most of us probably have experiences all of our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
But there comes a point where you start to embrace things, or things shift or change within you that you have to see. I see the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up very young, I had many experiences that I thought were just normal, but maybe not so normal to everyone else. Mm-hmm. And my mom made me feel it was normal. So Mom said it's normal, it's all good. And, I remember at a very young age having my great-grandparents would visit me.
Oh.
And they would, after they passed away, I was very close to my great-grandparents. And I remember waking up very early in the morning and looking in my room and seeing them standing there. And it would be not like I could see them like full body. It was like silhouettes of people, but I knew that it was my great-grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of startled me a little bit.
As it would.
It would. I mean, you're just a little boy, like, 4 or 5 years old, seeing, shadow people in your room who sound like your great-grandparents. But they felt...
And did you hear it, or did you hear it in your mind?
I could hear them with my ears. I could actually hear them having, like, it was almost whispers. They were whispering to each other. Although to themselves, maybe they're talking in their full voice, but to me, it sounded like whispers.
Mm-hmm.
And I told my mom, and my mom says, well, they just love you, they're just visiting you. And, that's pretty normal to have your ancestors, the people that you love, to spend time with you. And I thought, okay. In the last 4 months, I had another being connect to me who, I mean, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not really into the alien stuff as much.
Yeah.
But do I believe there's star people and star beings that connect to us? Yes.
Yeah.
But there was one guy who was blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he said he was a Lemurian connected to me. He didn't tell me his name. I saw his world. He took me there. I saw it. I saw how they live and how and I feel like they lived on other star systems more than just their one. And they even told me the history of what they went through and why they had to live on different worlds themselves because of, things that they faced in the past amongst their, different beings as well. But they're the world that I saw that they live in. If this is, where we're meant to go someday, because we're going to move out into the universe and live in different worlds, within the Milky Way, like physically, then we need to learn how to live in harmony and balance, and not only that, but to love the world from which we live upon. And that's one teaching that Indigenous people have been trying to share for a long time.
Right.
Is like how, Mother Earth.
Yep.
Caring for her, the animal nation, the plant nation, all the nations of Mother Earth herself, that we have to learn how to not take more than we need. We need to look at life and sustainability and really value what Mother Earth provides for us in relation to food, water, and resources, and care for Mother Earth in a much more greater and profound way. And I think from what I've seen in the world that I did get to visit with the person that had shown it to me it was pristine. The waters were clean, the forests were rich, and a lot of the trees they had there were similar to what we have here. The world was bigger, and they had no roads. They had no need for roads. They could travel, without roads. Like they had their ships to fly wherever they needed to go, etc. They were harnessing the sun in different ways. I got a glimpse
of what could be,
of what a future balanced civilization could look like. And we're not on that path. And I think if they've evolved to that space, which I know they have, we can too. But we have to shift and change. And we can't wait for our universal brothers and sisters to come down and scold us and spank our hand and say, listen, you're doing it all wrong. We have to figure it out. And it takes people, good people, inspired people like you, like me, and other people that have come in to not only help us find out about what spirit is, but understand where we are and the value of that.
The Rosicrucians talk about a process within an initiation in which at a certain point, what happens then is that they describe it as an etheric rose light arises from the heart and moves up to what's commonly called the third eye center. And with that rose etheric stream, it enters into the centers in the head, that area that is technically at the third ventricle of the brain and was known as the cave of Brahma in the Indian teachings. This is a particular area that's open in the head that has a space between the pineal and pituitary glands. And as this space becomes illuminated, it leads to direct spiritual vision. This is then a clairvoyant. The clairvoyant can actually perceive non-physical realities. But depending upon the individual, they may not consciously understand the structures or discern the different things that they are actually seeing. And again, they might be different from some of the other stages that we'll talk about in a moment. So the third aspect here is that there's also the cultivation of action or of the will. And this is linked to the belly, or what in Japan they call the hara, or in Chinese alchemy they call the lower dantian, the lower will centers here. And through the action or willing form of illumination, one is able to take action esoterically. You're able to actually use non-physical realities to change things on the physical plane. Now, at the most extreme form of this, we have things like actual physical alchemy and the transmutation of one physical substance to another. But this is usually attained after going through multiple steps of being able to transform something that is less dense. And that is normally etheric energy fields. So the actual vibrational transformation of energy fields, energy healing, things of that kind, is something that you find very strongly on this path. So the person that can actually transform things using spiritual forces is referred to as the adept. There's a reason why we're emphasizing the head, the heart, and the hara. When you study classical spiritual text, you find that they divide up the aspects of the human being into different types of forces. So the actual consciousness of the human being is often referred to as the astral body, and it's related to what's often called the spiritual plane of the astral plane. Within the Rosicrucian work, you find at a certain point that the consciousness body of the human being has 3 centers that can be worked on and awakened. And those 3 centers are around the head, the heart, and the hara. And this is really a universal teaching. If you study with the Buddhist, they'll talk about the thought, speech, and action. If you study with Sufis, they'll talk about the head, the heart, and the hands. All these different traditions are working with the same concept. If you studied Chinese medicine or Chinese internal alchemy like Qigong, you'll know that they have the upper, middle, and lower dantian. They refer to these as elixir fields, because when we understand what these actually are energetically, they are a kind of spiritual elixir field that we can work in and illuminate the forces of. So, depending on where we focus on primarily, we can first begin to develop the capacity of understanding things in a conscious manner, the patterns behind them, become the initiate, or directly perceive spiritual realities, the clairvoyant, or directly manipulate the spiritual forces, hopefully for a good outcome, and that's the adept. Is that the Rosicrucian tradition is one of the most recent of the great traditions on the planet. If you go back to the Vedic tradition in India, Tibetan tradition, etc., many others, they're very ancient. But the Rosicrucian tradition really only broke the surface in human history in the 1600s. The first Rosicrucian documents appeared in the 1600s with texts like Fama Fraternitatis in 1604 in Germany. Now, when these Rosicrucian texts first became available, one of the things that they emphasized in these texts was that the Rosicrucian organization wasn't connected to any one authoritative teacher, and it wasn't connected to any particular type of control structure. There was no institution for it. It was really a very free and independent path of modern initiation. Is that this fits within their understanding of the evolution of human consciousness, that we have attained a state today where there is actually a transition from an external human guru-based system to one in which the awakening of the human I am presence becomes the guru and connects directly to spiritual forces without a human intermediary. That was a fundamental concept in the early Rosicrucian text. So it all begins understanding the whole set of processes by understanding where everything comes from. In the ancient Greek times, they talked about the source of all being with the name of the One, in capital letters, the One. And this is a beautiful representation within sacred geometry that everything comes from a unified source. So within human evolution, we've gone through a certain pathway that we'll talk about in a moment, where in sacred geometry and the ancient Egyptian mysteries, they talked about the 1 becomes the 2 becomes the 4 becomes the 8. It ends up becoming the 10,000 things the Chinese talk about. But everything comes from the unified source of the One. It's all creation from the mind of God. And in the classical Western work from Greece and elsewhere, they talk about thoughts in the mind of God being the source of everything. And that's what Plato referred to as ideal types, or ideal thought forms. These are actually what construct the world. These thoughts in the mind of God take on different separate qualities and different separate functions in the world, and then they manifest through the different planes. It's understood from the classical Western Hermetic as above, so below tradition, of which Rosicrucianism is one of the most recent expressions, that the nature of the mind of God is essentially pure consciousness. Everything is based on a field of pure consciousness. You find the exact same teaching in the ancient Vedic text and many other world traditions. Consciousness is the basis.